In progress.
Hello and welcome everybody to this workshop or clinic on essay writing. I've started recording, so I'm now recording to the cloud. So for anyone who hasn't been able to make it, I'll be posting a recording of this onto the Moodle for delivering performance, and I'll make an announcement when I've done that, so you'll know where to find it. Welcome to the workshop. I'm looking forward to going through this with you. I set this up last year because I realized that some of you really kind of find it difficult to switch mode for this essay, because this essay is all about critical reflection. And really the whole course, the whole of delivering performance is about critical reflection. And we've looked at Sean's reflective framework in order to do that. And I've also posted some materials, for example, on Kolb's learning cycle throughout the course, so that you can develop your skills as a reflective writer. But what we're going to do over the next couple of hours is to really dig into how do you use that skill to write an essay. And I've got a Mentimeter presentation to show you in order to do that. Now, it's not going to be an interactive presentation this time. So although we will be doing it as a Mentimeter, which means that normally you can put answers to questions and things like that, I'm not going to be using it in that way. I'm just going to be using it for the slides. So I'm going to start with that. I also have a survey for you to do, and I'm going to post the link for that in the chat very shortly. Those of you who have been watching the announcements and watching the course will know that myself and Dr. Al-Sharif are doing a survey into free riding in business games. We're looking at the impact of group dynamics on business games, and to publish something about that, and hopefully create some insights that will make it easier for us to manage free riding as a problem. And by free riding, I mean people who are in groups but don't participate with that group or contribute effort to that group, but still get a group mark at the end of it, having done very little towards that mark. It's a pervasive problem in business schools right across the world. We're very keen on using group work because it reflects what happens in actual business. So it's a good skill working in teams, but it doesn't always work. So Dr. Al-Sharif and I are researching that. So it's a very worthwhile project, and we're really just asking for 5 minutes of your time to fill in a quick survey. You will be aware of the fact that we've completed the ethics procedure for that, and we have ethics approval to do it, but there's more in the survey about that. So what I'm going to do for now is just post a link to the survey, but don't worry about the survey at the moment, because I'm going to give you time to do it later in the talk. So what we're going to do is talk about essays, then we're going to take a break, and also I'm going to give you a kind of 10-minute slot to get the survey done. It is voluntary, but it literally takes 5 minutes, so I'd be very grateful if you could do it. And then we're going to open we're going to have a look at the actual essay that you're doing for this semester, and I'll take any questions. So what I will say is that I'm recording this session, so there will be access to a recording of this later. Particularly, and it will have captions and what have you, so that is quite a useful tool for many of you. Additionally, I would just ask that you don't put questions in the chat while I'm during the main body of the lecture, if you don't mind, because I've got 211 of you on the call, and I can't possibly keep up with the chat. It's just me on my own, so I won't be able to answer all those questions. If I finish speaking as part of the lecture, and then I find there are 50 questions and I've got 5 minutes left of the time that we have together, obviously I'm not going to be able to answer those questions. So please just listen to the lecture for now, And I will try to, if there's time at the end, take any questions. But I would also point you towards my Zoom drop-in that I do every day, Monday to Thursday. Nobody joined me yesterday. Obviously, we'll be in the lecture today, and I've got another meeting at 11, so I won't be able to do it today. But tomorrow and Thursday there will be a Zoom drop-in hour. You can drop in with your questions. If you email me about questions about the essay, I'm just going to point you towards the recording of this lecture and towards my Zoom drop-ins, because those are better ways to sort out problems with your essays rather than an email ping pong match, which is very difficult to write an essay via email. Unless you feel it's the only way, please don't email me about your essays, but make use of these other alternative ways of getting in touch with me. There's also Microsoft Teams. Okay, so let's start by getting on with the with what I've got prepared for you. Just 1 second while I cue this up. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that slide, critical writing in management studies. You can just give me a thumbs up or something if you can see that, it would be helpful. Okay, thank you very much. Right. So we're going to talk about, oh yes, sorry, I did also say that I put the link in the chat, didn't I? There you go. That's the link to the online survey. It takes literally 5 minutes, but don't worry about that right now. I'm going to give you time to do that shortly. Okay, so we're going to begin with some just general ideas about how you write an essay in management studies in particular. So when you start by structuring your essay, and by the way, I've taken this from Dr. Gail Pringle Barnes's Develop Your Academic Writing course, which there are links for in the Moodle. You can see links to that. So if you haven't already done academic writing course, I strongly recommend it because it really is excellent. So I've taken these slides directly from that. But there are really 3 elements to your essay. The first point I'm going to talk about here is structure. Now, in my experience, postgraduate students such as yourselves are usually pretty good at the structure part of it. So that means that we'll have a question at the beginning. So in this particular essay, I've asked you to identify something that you learned on the course. So let's just say, for example, you learned that price wasn't the most important strategy or the most effective strategy. So you might say at the beginning, you know, this essay is about the use of price and what I learned about that. You can use I, by the way, you can use first person because this is a critical reflection. And you can say, I learned that, whatever it is about price. And I will describe how I learned that in this essay by looking at our initial strategy, what went wrong, and what I learned from it using Kolb's learning cycle, for instance. So you'll have that bit at the beginning, and then there'll be an introduction, and then there'll be, you know, what we did at the beginning, why it was wrong, how Kolb's learning cycle helped me to understand that or something, what I learned and how I applied it later. So you see all the structure, headings, subheadings, paragraphs, and a conclusion at the end. And usually, as I say, postgraduate students are usually pretty good at that. So we don't usually find that there's a problem. It's very rarely that we'll get an essay that just rambles on with no sort of sense of structure. So that bit is really good. Now, the evidence part of it, this is where we usually find the more experienced students, or perhaps the students who have been more attentive to the course material, or that are just getting on pretty well with their student journey are usually pretty good at this, but not everybody is good at this. Now, what we mean by evidence is in academia, when you say anything really, you need to provide a source for it. So no matter what you say, if you say the sky is blue, although this might be a completely self-evident fact, in academia, we sort of want to know why you think the sky is blue, if you like. So it might be that you've read it in an academic peer-reviewed journal. So you can say the sky is blue, Smith and Jones 2013, page 56 or whatever. Okay, you're providing evidence for why you say the sky is blue. Or it might be that you just personally believe the sky to be blue, in which case you can say, I believe the sky to be blue. But you should provide evidence. Normally what we're looking for is sources which are academic peer-reviewed sources. That means basically academic journals from peer-reviewed journals. What we don't want in this evidence part is a business blog, something like Business Insider or LinkedIn or something like that, where somebody has just posted their views about some element of management on the internet. Okay, so that's not particularly helpful, because that hasn't been written with the purpose of helping students write their academic essays. If you go on Business Insider, for instance, that's a website which has been created as a resource for business people. So when they go to work and they hear a lot of people talking about supply chains and they don't know what a supply chain is, they can go on Business Insider and find out what it is. But that's very different to somebody writing an academic journal about supply chains, because that will provide the academic rigor and also the kind of discourse that you need for your essay. So don't just Google it, okay? So it really doesn't work. Sometimes we see essays where somebody's just like literally Googled the question, and then they've found various sources on the internet, and they've sort of patched those sources together into an essay shape. And it really doesn't work. It especially won't work here because we've asked you to provide a personal opinion. And the only place that you can, or personal experience, the only place that personal experience resides is inside of you. You can't Google it, it's not on the internet, it's a personal thing. So we will know straight away if you've just Googled it. So we're looking for peer-reviewed sources. So basically for postgraduate students, we usually find this bit is good, this bit can be good, but not always good. And then this bit, critical analysis, is the bit that postgraduate students quite often struggle with. And this is part of the step up to a master's program. This is the bit that you really need to kind of get the hang of by the end of your degree program. And I would say basically, if you've got evidence and structure, then probably your essay is going to pass. But if you're looking for these sort of A and B grades, then critical analysis is what we're really looking for. With that in mind, this is a little infographic that I've created about kind of, if you're really interested in grades, and grades are not the most important thing, to be quite honest. The most important thing is obviously that you pass the course, because if you fail and you have to do a resit, that's really, really inconvenient for you. And also these things can really snowball. And if you find that you get an increasing number of resits, it starts to increasingly predict that perhaps you're not going to finish the program. So it's better to just pass. It makes life a lot easier for everyone. But basically what we're looking for is to start off with by answering the question. So read the question really carefully and make sure that you answer it. I end up very sadly having to fail essays because somebody has written 2,000 beautiful words about something that they're really clearly passionate about, but has nothing to do with the question that we've asked. And it's very sad when that happens. People who don't provide any evidence at all, so it's just a personal kind of discourse, and there's no reference to the intended learning objectives, which you can find in Moodle. We can talk about that in a minute. And no evidence, well, really this points to this, but no evidence in this case from the game itself, like your personal experiences of the game. So those sort of essays sadly end up failing. And ideally, I would like to not fail anybody on this course. If it's at all possible that nobody fails on the course, I will be absolutely delighted. And I will do anything I can to make that happen. So there is no reason to fail this course, other than really, generally speaking, the people who fail are the ones who never engaged in the course in the first place. And it's very difficult to help those people. So I think for most of you, probably going to get through it. On this program, on this course, typically we average, students average around C2, C1, which is a good, C2 is a pass, C1 is better than just a standard pass. So we're moving into the sort of strong passes here, which is okay, that's absolutely fine. So what we find with these sorts of essays is that they're quite descriptive. So what that means is they'll sort of, in the essay, it will say what they learned on the course, but it won't reflect on that. It won't ask the question or answer the question, so what? That is a really, really important question. So every time you write something, it's a good idea to ask yourself, so what? Why did I write this? Why is this important? What is the point that I'm trying to get over? If it doesn't have that, then you can still pass, and you'll get a sort of, either a basic pass or a good solid pass, which is actually okay. That's fine. Nothing to be ashamed of. But the higher levels, the B's and the A's, you'll see that will either have the beginning of some sort of critical evaluation or reflection. In this case, you'll use different types of models to review, like maybe Kolb's and Shon, to look at how you learned. You refer to the intended learning objectives, and there'll be a definition of the context. So this infographic was actually written for a management essay, so I'll put definition of management context. But I think what's more relevant to you guys is a definition of the terms that you use. So when you say you learned about pricing strategy, then I want to know what pricing strategy is or what pricing strategy you used. And then there also needs to be, as well as a structure, what I call a golden thread. So there needs to be a thread right through the essay that explains what this essay is about. Even academics like things to be simple. So what we want at the beginning of the essay is, I'm going to talk about this. This is what I learned. Let's say it's the pricing strategy. And then you refer to that pricing strategy throughout the whole essay. And then you conclude with what you learned about the pricing strategy. So the essay never rambles or diverges from the single point of the essay, the golden thread, which is about this pricing strategy. So that's really important, that you keep your essay on target, as it were, and you don't digress, or as we say sometimes, go down any rabbit holes. So if you're talking about pricing strategy and then suddenly you get distracted and start talking about your tariff ratio, moving logistics from Asia to the USA or something, unless that's relevant to pricing specifically, then I don't really want to read that in your essays, because you didn't set that out as an objective in the beginning. So all you're doing is wasting words by covering different subjects which are not relevant. Okay, and also I've got sort of 4 tips for writing a successful essay. Don't worry if you can't read this, because it's quite small text, because I'm just going to go through it here. Number 1, write a brief summary of your essay. So before you start writing, build a structure. It can be just headings or bullet points, or you can write a heading for a paragraph and then just write the bullet points underneath it. But basically have some idea of what your essay is going to look like. Quite normally what you'd have is an introduction, a critical analysis of not the literature, this says the literature, but of your game, how you played the game. So don't worry about where it says literature here, because I'm not looking for too much literature from you in this essay. A discussion and a conclusion. and please include the limitations of what you argued. Guys, I did ask you not to put anything in the chat. I can see that you're starting to put things in the chat. So I can see this is just a question about recording. So that's fine. We are recording this. But just to remind you, please don't ask me questions in the chat. I won't be able to keep up with 200 questions. It's just not possible for me to do that. I will open up the chat if I get time later. Demonstrate your knowledge of theory. In this case, I want you to, this was written, this is a very general infographic, so this is not about your essay specifically. So the theory that I'm interested for this essay are reflective learning practice. So that might be Donald Shon, it could be Kolb, it could be Gibb. Those are the three that normally come up for this essay, but there are other learning theories as well. I'm quite happy to hear about those theories. Delighted, in fact, if you go sort of beyond what you've learned in the course, that's great. As I said before, make sure your essay has a golden thread. That's really, really important, as I said before. And also, please do make sure that your essay is written academically. What that means is that it's properly referenced using the Harvard referencing system. If you're still unsure about how to use that, then take a look at the Develop Your Academic Writing course, which is linked in Moodle. That has lots of stuff, or you can just Google the Harvard referencing system if you want to tell you how to do it. It's an author date system, so please make sure that you reference, you cite all of your sources properly. But also, academic style means about writing quite directly. In this case, you can write in the first person, so you can say, I learned that, rather than the writer learned such and such. So it's a more active, direct way of writing, and try not to digress and try to keep your words down as low as possible. Quite often, when people are struggling with words, they've got too many words, it's because there'll be a lot of however, I believe that, or nevertheless, and heretofore, and this sort of language with lots and lots of redundant sort of words. Okay, so just go through your words and get rid of any words that do not add anything to your golden thread. That's the best way to keep your word count down. So just every time you write a sentence, ask yourself, so what? Is this sentence relevant? Do I need to have this sentence? And of course, check your spelling and grammar. Okay, we spoke about critical reflection. Some of you will have seen this because I think I've covered this in a similar talk recently in the course, or at the beginning of the course, but it's a good idea to go back through it again. So what do we mean by critical reflection? It means basically it's asking, the best way I can really describe it is to ask yourself, so what? So if you write a sentence like, I learned that pricing strategy is not the most effective strategy. Okay, that's a descriptive sentence. How do we make that sentence more critical? Well, you can begin by saying, why is it important that you learn this? So what did you learn more importantly about business? So for example, in the use of price strategy, we see on this course all the time, a lot of students will go in the early rounds and try to put out their handset cheaper than the competition. That's the general idea. There are two problems with it. First of all, when they lower the price and they use their projections, the projection is usually that they get quite a good market share. So it sounds like a really good strategy. In reality, your team, your opposing teams, your competition, are probably thinking the same thing. So they're putting their price down as well. So, but you don't know that, and the projections can't take account of that. So what happens is your projected market share ends up being much smaller than you thought it was going to be. because your competition is doing the same thing as you. So what you've learned from this, the so what question, is that in the beginning, you were looking at the data in quite a superficial way, and you did not account for the impact of competition. Now, competition is a very important factor of business. So obviously, when you go off after this master's course and go and work in businesses, those businesses will have competitors, and those competitors will dictate, to a large extent, the strategy of the company. So you've learned something really important about business here. So it's important that you have a sentence that says, why is this important? So it's not about price per se, it's about competitors and being able to anticipate what competitors are. So you learned a really important business fact, that you have to be able to anticipate what your competition is going to do. So therefore, you've provided a much more critical response. So poor critical reflection is just purely description. It just describes what happened. That's poor critical reflection. Okay? So go back over your sentences if you've got time, and anything which sometimes you have to have a little bit of description, but it has to reach a point. There has to be a point in that argument. Okay. Right. So let's talk about structure then. With structure, it's really important that you communicate clearly and that you ensure a smooth and easy reading experience. It can really help you if you have somebody who is prepared to read your essay for you. If you have someone at home, brother, sister, mother, father, who can, or you just some friends in your social groups, that you can read each other's essays, I really strongly recommend it, because when you write something, you know what you mean to write. And sometimes when you read it back to yourself, you still read it as you thought it was meant to be presented, but you've missed out words, there are spelling errors, and for some reason we're very bad at auditing our own writing. So do try to get someone else to read it before you submit it. If you can't do that, then do go through it several times. One of the techniques that I use is I read out my essay into a dictaphone, into a recording device, and then I play it back to myself, so that as if I was speaking it out loud. If it makes sense, just hearing it, somebody speaking it, then it's definitely going to make sense on paper. So that's one of the techniques that I personally use. Think about who is marking this. So in this case, it's myself or one of the adjuncts that's been taking you in the tutorials. What sort of thing would they be looking for? So all of our tutors and myself, we're all kind of business oriented people. So we're looking for something that focuses on business, and we're looking for this reflective style. We're looking for this personal reflection. Make sure that your academic language is okay, that you're citing, and make sure that you cover adequately the study of your subject. Okay, so, and then obviously make your own decisions about that structure. So I suggested a structure early on, but it's really very much up to you and what makes sense. Okay, so what I'm going to cover now is another technique that you can use, which is called reverse outlining. Now, the purpose of reverse outlining is, some of us, myself included, when we go to write an essay, we just sort of, have some ideas and just kind of get them down on paper. So we end up with a page full of prose, a page full of words and paragraphs and sentences. But we want to know whether there's any structure to that, or whether we've managed to stick to a structure. So there's a way of doing it. If you didn't create those bullet points and those headings beforehand, or even if you did and you want to make sure that you've written it down true to your structure, what you can do is read through your draft and write down separately all of your subheadings or each of the paragraphs and what the paragraph is about. And then for each paragraph, write down in a single sentence what the point of that paragraph is. So what is this paragraph about? The first thing you can do is, if you can't figure out what that paragraph is about, then you can probably delete it. Quite honestly, you can be quite ruthless and just delete it. But hopefully it will say something like, this paragraph is introduces my pricing strategy, for instance. And then once you put all of those together, so you list, this paragraph is about this paragraph is about that, you can read through your list and then just basically see if it makes sense or if it's quite close to your original structure. If it isn't, then you might need to move those paragraphs about so that it follows the structure correctly, or you might find that some of those paragraphs can just go. And I know that sounds really ruthless, but I have, honestly, I've just actually, I'm doing a master's degree myself at the moment. I'm doing a master's in digital education. I've just submitted a 1,000-word essay about statistical techniques. And when I was reading through that at the weekend, I literally removed an entire paragraph because I realized when I read through it, that paragraph wasn't doing anything. It didn't say anything about the golden thread for that essay. It was completely worthless paragraph. So I just had to delete it. So you have to be quite prepared to just remove. Sometimes you write a paragraph and you're quite proud of what you've written and the way you've written it, but it turns out that it's just not important to make the point that you want to make in your essay, and you just have to be ruthless and get rid of it. Another thing I want to talk about is how you signpost your structure. And just before I go into this slide, there is something in people who study English language that I've heard of, and English literature as well. A lot of writers use this in novels, or even William Shakespeare used this in his plays. It's called the rule of threes, as in the number 3. The idea is that if you're going to say anything, don't say it once, but say it 3 times, because that really helps the reader and the marker, in this case, to understand what you're saying. So what you would do typically is you would introduce the idea. So you would say, okay, I'm going to talk about pricing strategy. So you say what you're going to talk about, then you talk about it. So then you say, okay, I'm going to introduce pricing strategy. Pricing strategy is, the predominant use of price as a method to compete in the marketplace, usually by offering a lower price than competitors. And then you tell the reader what you've told them, so you conclude. So your final sentence, if you like, would be, I've defined price as a competitive strategy. So you're concluding, summarizing. So you'd say, okay, in this paragraph, I introduced the notion of pricing strategy. Pricing strategy is the use of price as a single strategy to outcompete rivals in the marketplace, usually by using a lower price to attract a larger market share. Therefore, pricing strategy is focus on price alone as a means to achieve competitive advantage, let's say. So basically, I've spoken about pricing strategy in 3 different ways, and that makes it abundantly clear to the reader what that means. And that's also a kind of signpost. Another way of looking at this is when you write your paragraphs, make sure that you've got a sentence at the beginning of your paragraph which actually explains what that paragraph is there for. Okay, so basically, it is important at the beginning of the essay to say how you're going to structure it. And most of you, I think, are pretty good at this. So you'll say, this essay is about what I learned while I was on the Delivering Performance course. Whilst I was on the course, I learned that pricing strategy was an ineffective way to achieve competitive advantage. I will discuss this by explaining the mistakes that we made at the beginning of the game in the first few rounds, and what we learned and how we regained advantage during the game by changing our approach to pricing strategy. and I will be using Kolb's learning cycle to explain how the learning process involved in pricing strategy. So that would be, so that in doing that, you're explaining the structure of the essay. And then each paragraph has this sentence which says, this paragraph is about X. Okay. Oh, I see that actually there's an error in the slide here where I've repeated that twice. So I do apologize for that. And then it's also very important that you link right the way through your paragraph, the whole purpose of the paragraph. So don't have anything in the paragraph which doesn't conform to that first sentence. So don't start talking in that. If you said this is about pricing strategy, don't start talking about, let's say, branding or something like that, okay? Because that's a different subject. So just to reiterate, begin with a topic sentence, present your evidence. So you could say this paragraph is about pricing strategy. Pricing strategy is, you can give a definition, but then you could link to the literature. So you could find a journal article or something in a textbook which tells you what pricing strategy is. And then you can present that with your evidence. Okay, and then conclude with a statement of what this evidence means. In other words, ask yourself that question I mentioned before, so what? Okay, so, once you've presented your definition of pricing strategy, why is that important? It became important. We realized that this definition of pricing strategy was important because it's very narrow and it didn't give us the flexibility we needed to be a competitive company, for example. So also in conclusions, this so what question comes up again and again and again. So again, don't just use a descriptive style. There's no point in describing what you've written in the last, 4 or 5 pages, because your marker has just read that. So he or she will already know what points you've made. So you have to, basically, there has to be a purpose for the conclusions. Typically, it's a kind of what's next type of question or a so what question. So you learn this about pricing strategy. What are you going to do with that information? Is it going to inform you as a management practitioner when you go and get a job after this degree? Is it going to inform your career? Perhaps you already have a career in management, and this has helped you to understand how to be a better manager. Maybe you're going to go and start a business and use this sort of thing that you're going to learn, or maybe you're going to bear this in mind when you come to your dissertation or something like that. Okay. Okay. So using sources. One of the things in this course, I've been very, very keen that you're not inundated with loads and loads of academic sources. So I've given you 1 or 2 papers about reflective learning. So I'm not expecting to see a huge long list of citations. However, I do want to see a good half a dozen to a dozen references in this essay. And the reason for that is that it comes back to that evidence point that I made before. So for one thing, if you're going to refer to Kolb's learning cycle or Gibbs' learning cycle or Donald Shon, then you need to reference those to start with. The second point is, if you want to talk about branding strategy, for instance, then I want to know what branding strategy is. So you need to define it. And if you define it, you need to state where you found that out. Okay, so you should have plenty of sources by now from your management degree so far, your master's degree so far, that you know where to find a reference on branding, for instance. Or if not, you should be able to find it in the library or even Google Scholar. So if you refer to something, if you talk about supply chain operations, then I want to see a reference there. I want to know what you mean by supply chain operations, and I want to know where you found that out from. Also, just a sort of pet subject for me, if you're going to introduce graphics, here we're talking about referencing sources of data, but just generally, if you're going to use a graph or any kind of image, please make sure that that image has a source. So you need to say where you got that image from. It needs to have the labels need to be the axes need to be labeled. So here you can see you've got group A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The chart needs a title, and there should ideally be a caption underneath to explain what it is. The biggest issue I see in graphics, where I see marks being deducted, is screenshots or photos from a textbook or screenshots from the internet that are just pasted into an essay. Please don't do that, because it looks really bad. It looks sloppy. It doesn't look professional. Usually the quality of those graphics is quite poor. It's quite difficult to read. And very often those images come with a load of extra text, which are relevant inside that textbook or in that web page, but are not relevant to your essay. So it just looks quite lazy if you just cut and paste a screenshot of a graphic. So the best way, if you're going to create a graph, use whatever software you use to create graphs. Most people would use Microsoft Excel, or you can use Pages, or you can use any of the open source versions of Excel. They produce quite decent graphs. Obviously, if you're competent with SPSS, Stata, or R, which is a statistical programming language, then you can produce journal quality graphs. But Excel is okay, or even PowerPoint. If you're going to do a kind of flow chart or some sort of graphic that explains something, the best place to do that is probably something like PowerPoint or an open source version, and then export it as a PNG. That will come out as quite a high quality graphic that I can read when I'm marking it. But I don't want to see some tiny little postage stamp sized blurry screenshot from the web, because it just makes your whole essay look quite sort of sloppy. I'm sorry to use that language, but that's kind of the impression that you get. Okay, so, and obviously you need a list of references at the end. So we need full details of all the sources listed alphabetically, and that comes underneath your conclusion. So we'll go conclusion, list of references, and then all of your references in the Harvard style. Now, a lot of people will ask me about word counts. So they will say to me, if I put a citation in my essay, does that count? Is that part of my word count? The easiest way, and do words in images and tables and things, do they count towards my word count? The easiest way to describe this is to say that everything above that list of references is included in the word count, no matter what it is. If it's above the list of references, so that includes your citations, then it's included in the word count. The reference list itself, big long list of sources that you used, is not included in the word count. Okay? Okay, right. We're going to take a little bit of a break because I've been talking for nearly an hour, but I would like to bring your attention to our free riding in business game survey. I mentioned this at the very, very beginning. You can access the survey by using that QR code, or you can use the link which I put in the chat, or you can use the link that I've put down at the bottom of this slide. It's really, really simple. In fact, let me just show you it first. So, yeah, let's stop that share. So this is the survey. Let's just, oh, sorry, preview survey. Okay, so it's about free riding in business games, as I explained before. It can literally take, it should only take 5 minutes. Now, obviously, it's very important that we treat you ethically as participants and that we make sure that your responses are confidential, that they're private, that we don't share your responses with anybody. And we've done all of that in order to make sure that that you're properly controlled, properly protected. That's a much better word, isn't it? So, and we have to legally put all of everything that we've done in order to protect you. So the first 2 pages are very text heavy. So, and that is really just to make sure that you know that we are protecting you. But once you've clicked through the first 2 pages, this basically tells you a lot more information about what we're asking for. So feel free to go through this. But the actual survey itself is really, really easy. Please make sure that you put your universe and team in, because without that information, it becomes useless. I can't use it unless I know what team you're in. And then tell us what you're happy to do. So if you complete this survey, it will take literally 5 minutes. If you're interested in being an interviewee for us, that takes 40 minutes, but obviously it won't be now. You just click the box and we will get in touch with you to arrange the interview. But if you just want to spend 5 minutes to help us, you just click survey 5 minutes, and then very, very simply it asks you what your name is. And then for every person in your group, it asks you to write the name and whether you would go to that person for advice. Now, I just want to be quite clear. We are literally asking, is that person a source of advice? We're not asking you, do you like that person? Do you think that person cheats at cards? Would that person lie to his granny or something? We're not asking anything derogatory or nasty about that person. Literally in life, there are some people you would go to for advice and there are some people who you would not go to for advice. Doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that they're not good sources of advice. So please don't think of this as a political thing that you have to just click often or always for everybody to be nice, because that doesn't really help us. Please just be as honest as you can. All of this is confidential. We don't share it with anybody. When we publish it, it will be just amalgamated together. Nobody's name is going to appear in this research. We're not going to publish anybody's name. We literally take the names straight off it as soon as we have basically we're creating social networks. And once we've worked out what the network is in a team, we remove everybody's name because we're not actually interested in who is doing it. And then you click finish. It literally will take 5 minutes. So, oh, can I give you a link? Yeah. So, whoops. Okay, that wasn't very clever. Let me just click that link into the chat box. Right, that's the link there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break right now. I will pause the recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you very much for those of you who have completed the survey. That's very kind of you. We've got 107 responses so far, so that is a really great response. Thank you so much. I know it won't benefit you directly, but I hope that we can really sort of find a way of making group work work in business schools, and this is a step towards that. So thanks very much for your help. If you haven't managed to do it, obviously you still have the link, so you can carry on with that survey if you're still on there. Right, what I want to do now is go back to our talk about the essay, and we're just going to talk a little bit about plagiarism, I'm going to try and whistle through these slides so that we can have time in the chat to talk about any specific issues that you might have. So let me start by re-inviting you to the Mentimeter, and then I'll share the screen. Oh, I see it. Right, okay. So you should be able to see that now. So that was the break. And now we're on to quick talk about plagiarism. Now, I'm sure that you will have already heard plenty about plagiarism, so I'll try to make this quick, but also we just want to emphasize how people can kind of get themselves into trouble with plagiarism. So what is the practice of plagiarism? It's about basically passing somebody's ideas off as your own ideas. Now, that could be quite innocently done by mistake, simply by saying, for instance, a pricing strategy is a strategy which deliberately uses a low price to beat competitors or something, and then not putting in a source. So basically, by not putting a source, it makes it appear as if that work is your own, as if you haven't picked it up from somewhere, or you haven't read it somewhere. Plagiarism is actually illegal. It was just made in nearly all countries. It's at very least a copyright infringement. It's actually not unknown for people to go to jail for plagiarism. I don't want to terrify anybody, because in most cases that's not what's going to happen. But you can get grade reductions, warnings, and you could actually be kicked off the program for plagiarism. So there's basically 4 different types of plagiarism. There's direct plagiarism, what we call mosaic plagiarism, self-plagiarism, and accidental plagiarism. Direct plagiarism is exactly what you think it is. So it's basically like going to find something on the internet, for example, copy, cut, and pasting it out of that website, putting it straight into your essay, and passing that work off as your own. That's direct and fairly obvious plagiarism. There's also a sort of accidental plagiarism called mosaic plagiarism. And that's basically not citing something correctly. So if, for instance, you said that Sun Tzu said that warfare is just based on deception, for example, that's not quite right. You have to basically use the words that Sun Tzu used and then cite those words. So it's no good saying, for instance, Henry Mintzberg says that administration is a waste of everybody's time, for instance, which Henry Mintzberg kind of said, but you're paraphrasing Henry Mintzberg when you said that, and you haven't added a citation or a quote. So you either, if you paraphrase Henry Mintzberg, then you put Mintzberg 1975 or whatever it is. Or if you directly quote him, make sure that that quote is accurate and that it's in speech marks and we've got a page number and so on. So mosaic plagiarism is basically incompletely citing a source. It's sort of paraphrasing something from a source but not properly citing it. And then there's self-plagiarism, which is kind of important actually. So this can happen quite a lot, where you literally think, oh, I've written about, let's say we go back to our pricing strategy again. I've actually written an essay about pricing strategy earlier in the program. So I'll just copy, cut, and paste a big chunk, a paragraph out of that essay and put it in this essay. Unfortunately, Turnitin will pick that up, because when you, any essay that gets put into Turnitin joins that enormous database of anything that any student has submitted anywhere in the world ever. And if your text matches exactly that text, it will come up on Turnitin and say, oh, a student has used this before. It's actually you that's used it before, but it's still against the rules to self-plagiarize. So don't just lift stuff out of any earlier work that you've done. It has to be original every time. So you might want to make the same points, but you'll need to reword it to do so. And then there's accidental plagiarism, which we do see quite a lot, where people just literally forget to put their citations and references. And that can be a problem too, because it's still quite sloppy academic writing, and you could still get a grade reduction for that. So how do you avoid plagiarism? Well, number one is do not Google something. So if you've got, I know it seems obvious thing to do to Google it. I mean, if you want to know what a supply chain is or what a pricing strategy is, by all means, Google that. Go and look at it on Wikipedia or something like that, because that will give you an idea of what you're talking about. And actually, if it goes to somebody's website, like a business consultant, quite often what I see in essays is a management consultant who's talking about, let's say it's price or promotions or something like that, like the 4Ps. So let's say you want to talk about the 4Ps in marketing. You will probably find a marketing consultant who's got a website somewhere who very neatly explains what the 4Ps are. That's quite useful in the sense that you can read it straight away, get a very accessible kind of readout on what the 4Ps are. The big problem is if you cite that, sorry, if you copy it into your essay or even paraphrase it into your essay and then cite it, so you think that's okay, it's not an acceptable academic source, because that person is putting that down on their business site for the purpose of advertising their knowledge and advertising their utility as a marketing consultant in the hope that someone will give them a job as a marketing consultant. They're not writing it in order to provide a reasoned, articulate, and academic summary of the 4Ps. They're not going to write about the 4Ps critically and why the 4Ps doesn't work, for instance, because maybe they're going to use the 4Ps when they get this job. So they don't want to make it appear like the 4Ps has some kind of weakness or something like that. So it's written in a biased way. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that website. They're writing it for the purpose of selling themselves for business, which is perfectly legitimate, but it makes it an untrustworthy source for academic writing specifically. So do Google it in order to find out what's going on and what that subject is, to describe it, explain it, but do not use the results of your Google search in your essay. Okay, it's a common problem. And just because something, like, so quite often people will refer to LinkedIn blogs where somebody's just writing about supply chain operations or something like that, but they're not writing a critical, evidenced, academic piece about supply chains. So it is of no use to you personally. So, so be very, very careful about how you use Google. Avoid blogs and business sites for all the reasons that I've said. Another thing that you will find if you Google a subject is you will find essay mills. Essay mills are websites which provide a repository of pre-written essays. You can get the pre-written essay quite often for free. The idea is they'll give you something for free and then you sign up. And then after you sign up, you can then buy essays off them on certain subjects, or you can even commission somebody to write an essay for you if you can afford to do that. Those are illegal, okay? So if you use an essay mill, there is every chance that you will be removed. If you're suspected of using an essay mill, you will be referred to the University Senate. There will be an investigation, and if it is found that you have indeed been using essay mills, you could very well be removed from the program and leave the university without any degree. It's really serious. Not only that, if you've been expelled from a university for plagiarism, it's very unlikely that any other reputable university will take you on as a student. So it's really, really not a good idea to use these essay mills. They've now been made illegal in England. They've not been made illegal in Scotland yet, but I imagine that's going to happen quite soon. It's illegal for you as a student to use them. It's illegal in England now for them to even operate. So these are quite serious things. They look like they're helpful and friendly. They put out a kind of message that they're there to help students, but they're not there to help students. They're there to make a ton of money out of you. So they are exploiting students. Because you are writing a personal essay, you are never going to be able to download an essay from an essay mill that answers that personal question anyway. So you're not going to get a good grade if you do that. So please do avoid them. I'm saying this not for my sake, but for your sake, because they are exploiting students. They are criminals. So have a system of checking your work. Go through your work. Make sure that you've cited. Quite often, if you want to write something, you want to make a point, but you haven't got time to go and find out like where you read that one time, or go and check your Mendeley or your EndNote or wherever you're keeping your references. Just put in brackets capital ref or something and highlight it in yellow to make sure that when you go back through the essay, you realize that there's a point there that you've got to add a reference. So have a system. Right, there are online plagiarism checkers, which are frankly better than Turnitin. So if you just Google plagiarism checkers, there's a lot of really, really good ones. What I recommend is that once you've written your essay, you put them through one of these online plagiarism checkers. I think there's one called CopyLeaks, which is quite good. And it will give you a similarity score similar to Turnitin. If you rely on Turnitin in the admissions portal in Moodle, unfortunately, you've already submitted your essay before you get your Turnitin score quite often. So it's too late if your plagiarism score is kind of high to pull your essay out, correct it, and put it back in again. So it's a bit too late for that. So use an online plagiarism checker before you can even use Turnitin for free, just don't use our portal one. And secondly, as I said before, check your writing with a buddy, a study buddy. Okay, a quick word about Turnitin itself. We use Turnitin in our admissions portal. So when you submit your essay, it will give you a similarity score. I want to point out that it is not a plagiarism checker for you, it's a plagiarism checker for us. So it tells us how similar your essay is to other things that are in the Turnitin database, like other student essays, journal articles, LinkedIn articles, anything on the web. It will find if your words match the words in those other sources, and it will highlight them, and it will give us a similarity score. Okay. I just want to point out that please do use a plagiarism checker before you use Turnitin, because it's quite often too late to get your essay back out of the admission portal. So check it somewhere else before. A second really important point that lots of people miss, including academics, is that it's a similarity checker, not a plagiarism detector. So it will say that your essay, for instance, is 16% similar to other stuff that it's matched across the internet. And 5% of it might be a word for word similarity with, say, a LinkedIn article or a Forbes article that Turnitin has found on the internet. It doesn't tell us that you've plagiarized. It tells us that your essay is similar to other essays that have been submitted by students or other things that are on the web. That's not the same as plagiarism. So it could be that you've simply forgotten to put a quote in, a quotation in quote marks, or you've forgotten to cite it, or sometimes you will have citations, but it just picks up the similarity in the text. AI is really good at sweeping through those vast archives of data in a way that a human being could never approach. But AI itself is not good at making judgments. It's human beings that are good at making judgments, but we can't search that vast archive of data. So we work with Turnitin to help us search all of those data and check it against your essay. But all we get at the end of the day is a similarity score. We then have to go into the essay and into the Turnitin report to see whether or not that is plagiarism. It's very, very likely that you will get a similarity score of some kind. Quite often you might get 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20% similarity without it being plagiarism. If I see an essay with more than 20%, I probably will look at the Turnitin report and then start looking at it. Sometimes we get things that are 50, 60. I've even had 100% similar, where a student had literally submitted a journal article and tried to pass it off as their own work. So obviously that is a case of blatant plagiarism. But normally the scores are much lower than that. So don't panic if you do get a low score. So take a look at all the matches. So if I would suggest that you go and use copy leaks rather than Turnitin, and then when you get the report, review each of the matches. Ask yourself, is there a good reason for that match or not? So if there isn't a good reason, you can't understand why there is a match, check your referencing and make sure that the referencing is okay. If, however, it turns out that you've just come up with a form of words which is similar to what's been used elsewhere, then there's a good reason for that match, and therefore we're not going to accuse you of plagiarism. So a very good example might be the use of common academic language. So, however, when we consider pricing strategies, as a sentence might have been used numerous times by numerous academics and students. So there might be a very good reason that you've used the same language, or you've provided a direct quotation. Charles Darwin said, quote, end quote. As long as it's in quotes and it's got a reference, that's not plagiarism, even though it may be picked up by your similarity checker. So that completes my look at plagiarism, and we've got about sort of half an hour now just to ask any questions. So I'm going to stop the share and just get rid of that. I see there's one question in the chat, so feel free. We can have an open season on the chat now, so you can type in your questions into the chat, or if you just want to ask me, you can just unmute your mic and ask me any questions you might have about your essay. The essay is due on the 4th of April at midday, okay? Okay, somebody's asked me if I can send the PowerPoint through the chat box. I can't do that because Zoom only allows me to share files that are on SharePoint. And that file, I could put it on SharePoint, but I can't do that while I'm still talking to you. So what I will do, however, is I will put the essay, I will post it on Moodle for you later today, okay? Are there any other questions? Okay. Right, okay, it's like we're opening the floodgates now, so that's... Okay, do we need to reflect on our mistakes in the running the company, same as the group assessment, or should we focus on the process of teamwork, such as how we make the right decisions, the motivations of our members, individual performance during the cooperation? That's from Gaoji. Thank you very much for that question, Gaoji. All of the things that you've put down there are okay for topics for your essay. So you can talk about like the actual mistakes you made. For example, if you made a mistake with not producing enough or not building enough production plants to service demand, for instance, you could include that as something that you reflect upon. If you had any friction in your team, or just some element of teamwork dynamics, like there was a very assertive person in your team, but it turned out that she was wrong in the end, but everybody believed her because she was so confident. Okay, that's fine. The motivations, I felt unmotivated at the beginning because nobody asked me to provide any information, or I wasn't asked about anything in the team. That's okay. Or you know, I felt like at first I didn't gel with the team and I wasn't performing very well, but it got better through the course. That's okay as well. Any of those things. So teamwork, elements of the game. The point is, unlike in the group presentation where perhaps you might have presented some element where you made a mistake and then you learned and you come up with a new strategy, then that's quite descriptive and that's okay for that group work presentation. But here I want you to reflect, what does this mean to you personally? So it might be something to do with the team, but I don't want you to tell me how teams perform generally. I want you to tell me what you learned. So this is the thing that I'm interested in for this essay. What did you learn? Whatever it was, whether it was in the game or within your group or some other element, even something you read perhaps, while you were playing the game, what did you learn from it? Okay, so Mohammed has asked me, is the essay deadline shows 25th of March, is the deadline revised? I think the deadline is the 4th of April. I've just gone and read that. Are you sure that's not the deadline for the digital transformation course? Because this is just purely about delivering performance. So if you're on that other elective, that might be a different deadline, but I'm pretty sure I just went and looked that it's the 4th of April, but I'll clarify that in a second. So Marin said that they came to join the office hour, but it shows no host. May I ask how to enter? Oh, that's rather strange actually, because sometimes I'm on the office hour, but I might be involved in something else. But I'll go and do that other thing, particularly if there are no students there, because I always get an email when people try to join the Zoom. And then if I get an email, I'll respond to that by going back to the room. So basically, as long as you join the waiting room, and you don't mind waiting a few seconds, or literally just be a few seconds, I will definitely be there. So I'm not quite sure why that happened, but basically the link is on Zoom. Sorry, the link is in the Moodle in the information section. It's 10 till midday tomorrow and Thursday, and then Monday to Thursday the week after. So please do try to join. If it says there's no host, yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's a glitch, but I will make sure, especially as we're running up to the essay, I will make sure that I'm there as much as I can. And if I'm not there because I get called away, I'll put an announcement in the announcement section. So please do keep trying. If I'm not there, keep trying. Shinyu says, should we choose one topic or several topics, like a piece of strategy, marketing and finance? That's very much up to you. My advice is probably just to choose one topic, because it makes it simple and it means that you can get everything in your essay to relate to that one topic. But there's nothing to stop you choosing a couple of different topics. If you feel like there isn't enough in one topic to get to the 2,000 words, then that's fine. You can use more than one, but my recommendation is to go for one if you can. Okay, I've got a direct message, so I won't say the name of this person, but the question is, learning objectives of scoring criteria, we are asked to cover all of the learning outcomes. What does it actually mean for learning outcomes, where they're coming from, key point of the textbook or experience of the SESIM game? So it's all based on experience for the SESIM game. I want to know where your experience reflects on one of the ILOs or all of the ILOs, ideally. Okay, so look at all of the ILOs in the information section in Moodle. It lists the 5 or 6 learning outcomes for the course, and compare your experience. What does it tell you about those learning outcomes? Jiahui says, should it be a reflection to each part of the design that we made, or just focus on 1 or 2 selected aspects like pricing strategy? Yeah, just focus on ideally 1, maybe two aspects. Okay. Fenji asks, should we focus on one point such as price issues or talk about all the lessons? So don't all the lessons that we learned. Don't try to talk about all of the lessons that you learned, because I'm hoping that you learned a lot of lessons while you were on my course. And I think that would take too long to cover all of those lessons. Just try to focus on one, maybe two things. Okay, another direct message. Since it's an individual reflection, how to relate it to academic sources. So, as I said before, you can relate to academic sources such as how you learned by relating to sources about learning processes and cycles like Donald Shon or Kolb, for example. And when you talk about, let's say, supply chains or logistics or price or marketing or branding, all of those things are defined in the academic literature. So if you talk about branding, define what you mean by branding and put an academic source to say where you got it from. So I'm not expecting to see a lot of academic sources, and you don't need to critically evaluate those sources because you're critically evaluating yourself as a reflection. So I would expect fewer sources, but I would expect that if you talk about a particular topic, like the 4 Ps in marketing, or product differentiation, or environment, sustainability, corporate governance, that sort of thing, I would expect to see a reference there, an academic reference. The Word document with the assessment instruction has 25th of March as a deadline. Thank you for that, Alexandra. Okay. That is a mistake, I believe. So, in fact, Mohammed has also said that the assignment brief has 25th of March. So, actually, I think what we'll do is we'll move this to the 4th of April because we're already struggling. We've had a lot of student sicknesses with COVID. Looking at the group presentation, it's quite possible that the marking is going to be delayed because quite a few of our markers are sick with COVID as well. So I think, since I've made this mistake, for which I apologize, I think it's only fair that we move the deadline to the 4th of April. So I will ask business management if they will allow me to move it to the 4th of April, and I'll get back to you on that hopefully today. Okay, does that seem fair? I hope that seems fair. Somebody's asked about the word count. 2,000 words plus or minus 10% is correct. Do we need to make improvement plans for the future, such as how to improve in the future? So that's a really good question. Thank you for that. Yes, well, you don't need to, you don't have to, but certainly I'd be very impressed if you said, you know, I learned this, and the way I'm going to approach this in the future is with an action plan to how you're going to improve decision-making in the future, for instance. I think that would be very impressive if you did that. So you don't have to do that, but it's a good idea. The scoring criteria mentions a roadmap. Could you explain exactly what this is from UA? Yeah, okay. So what I mean by a roadmap is the signposting. So when I spoke about signposting in the talk today, that's what I mean by a roadmap. So when you say, in this essay, I will discuss subject X, X is defined as da 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 with a citation. I will be using Kolb's learning cycle to explain how I develop my learning about X. And I will also explain in the first section how we failed to understand X, and then how we learned about X in the next section, and what we did after that in the final section. And then I will conclude. That's sort of like signposting, but we can also say that that is a, we can also say that that's a roadmap. Yeah, so Rory, yeah, you've pointed out that it says 4th of April on the submission portal. It seems like there's a different date on the actual instructions, which is a mistake. That's a mistake on my part. So my apologies for that. Okay, so that's right. Okay, I'm getting a few questions here by direct message. So I'm not sure whether you want me to share this with the group or not. But somebody has asked about 2 events in the report. Do they need to be interconnected or could they be different? They could be different. There's no reason why they couldn't be different, just as long as you explain exactly why you learned from them and how they relate to the learning outcomes. What I really want to know in this essay, if I could boil it down to one sentence, is what you learned on the course and how that relates to the learning outcomes. So if you type that at the top of your page to remind you, or even have it as a header, make sure you take it off before you submit it, but just to remind you as you write, that would be pretty much it. So it doesn't matter whether you have 1, 2, or 10 events. I just think it's going to be a lot easier for you to write it if you have one or 2 maybe. The instruction document has mentioned that we have to think of the incident, this is from Menyi, of an incident, event, or occurrence to reflect on. What do these terms exactly mean? Can I understand that I can reflect on one significant decision or an argument or a conflict? May I reflect on several incidents in different rounds because the incidents or events happened in a group which are usually fragmented? So let me answer that question in piece by piece. So when I say incident, event, or occurrence, I literally mean anything that happened that you think is important to your learning. So it could be that when you looked at the results for that particular round, your share value was much lower than you thought it was going to be. And that might have prompted you to think about why your strategy wasn't quite as effective as you thought it was. So this is in Kolb's learning cycle is something like the concrete kind of learning experience. So you have a learning experience, and that could be an incident, event, or occurrence. I'm using those different words because I don't want you to be tied into a very narrow definition of what that learning experience could be. It could literally be you were thinking about the game and walking the dog when suddenly you realized that your pricing strategy was wrong or something. It could be anything like that. If it's something like team dynamics, then obviously under that heading of team dynamics, there could be a series of incidents. So there might be, you know, the argument that we had with the leader of the team in week 1, or it might be when person B didn't turn up for the tutorial in week 3 or something. As long as that instigates, and I don't want, if you do bring anything like that into it, by the way, I don't need names or anything like that. You can just refer to people in your team anonymously, please. But you can just say, well, I'm not interested in whether person A or B turned up or not, or whether the leader was a bully. Well, I mean, I am interested in that for different reasons, obviously. But in terms of your essay, if your leader was overbearing, let's say, I want to know why that's important. What did you learn from that? That's what I want to know. Obviously, if there were any disrespectful behavior or anything like that, then you should report that using the links that I've given you on the Moodle. So that's a different story. And a bit of a rabbit hole that I've just gone down. So next question is, should we talk about theories about decision making and talk about how to make a better decision, such as some decision making models? Yeah, absolutely, Frenji, but please do provide examples from your own experience on the game. Okay. Okay, thank you, Menyi. Are there any further questions? We've still got 20 minutes. If there aren't any further questions, then what I will do is I will go and ask business management to change the assignment deadline to the 4th of April while I'm while I've still got time to do that. So any further questions? Okay, that's great. Thank you so much to everybody who's participated in the survey. I'm really grateful for that. Thank you for everybody who's turned up. That's a really nice number, 236. I will record it, or have been recording it, and I will post that later. Do we have a drop-in today? I can't do a drop-in today, I'm sorry, Rui, because I've got another meeting at 11, but I'm planning to have one tomorrow and hopefully Thursday as well. So, oh, final question. Could you combine decision-making models with items such as price strategy? Yes, of course you can. Yes, that's no problem with that at all. So it's not just how you use the models, but it's how you use the models within the game. Okay, thank you very much. You've been a great group to talk to. You've been very responsive. Thank you very much, and good luck with your essays. Don't forget, I am here. I'm also on MS Teams. Try not to use email, please, because email is just really sluggish and slow. I very quickly get snowed under with lots and lots of emails. There are actually 396 of you on the course. I'm also running another course and teaching on another course again. So I have a lot of students, and if you all email me, it will be impossible for me to answer. So please do use MS Teams or drop in on the Zoom. I am here to help you, and I want to help you. Like I said, if we can get everybody through the essay as a pass at least, I will be absolutely delighted. If there are no fails and you can all go on and move on with the program without any obstacles, that would be great. But thank you very much for today, and thank you for the survey response. Best of luck, everybody. Bye-bye.